Hey folks, in this video I'm going to show you how to do bracketing with your new A7IV or Sony A7III, and it's a fairly straightforward process to set it up. So I'm going to show you the setup on the camera first, because if you're trying to do bracketing, that's the meat of what you want to get to right away. So I'm going to cover the how to set it up on the camera first, and then I'm going to show you how I take my images from the camera into Capture One, into a folder, and then into a program called Photomatics. It's easy peasy, and once you see what you can get from a program like Photomatics, and keep in mind, it's not a paid review, okay? There's other programs that will do HDR. You can do a little bit HDR in Capture One. Lightroom does it, Photoshop does it, but I just find Photomatics is the program that I use. It's my go-to program for HDR stuff, and it's what I do with my images once they're bracketed, once I've got them into the camera and I want to manipulate them. It's a fantastic program for getting you images that you can hang on your wall. So if that sounds like it might be of interest to you, this is the video for you. Let's jump in. So the easiest way to explain bracketing on the A7IV is to first show you how to set up bracketing on the camera itself. And it's very straightforward. Typically what I'll do is, if I'm going to do a landscape or something like that, I'll put the camera into P mode and take a meter reading. In this case, I'm at F2 at a 40th of a second. I'll switch the camera back into manual in case I want to make some creative adjustments. But once the camera's in manual and I've got my light setting, then it's just a matter of hitting the function button, which is this guy right here. Click down on the center. So you're in the drive mode, you're going to come down, and you're going to see 4 modes of bracketing: continuous bracketing, single shot, white balance, and DRO. DRO and white balance I almost never use, so I'm going to focus on continuous bracketing for the purpose of this demonstration because it's what I use the most. Now if I hit the right side of the selector dial where it says ISO, I can scroll back and forth and you'll see the labeling at the top of the screen change. So you've got 3 stops over 5 frames. So if you're looking at 3.0 EV3, what that means is 3 frames at an f-stop of 3 f-stops. And I don't think I've ever shot at 3 f-stops over or under exposed. I shoot at 1 over typically, or 1 under. And so for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to come across and we'll select 5 frames at 0.5 of an f-stop. And I'm going to press the selector dial. And once I do that, you can see that at the bottom meter reading there, you can see the 5 frames have been selected. We're in continuous mode. So what that means is that when I press the shutter button, it fires all 5 frames automatically. And the only difference between what I have here and what I do in real life is, in real life I would have radio triggers set up, and I'll fire them by radio trigger so I don't jostle the camera and have any vibration introduced into my images. Now, if I hit the function button again, press the selector, I can come to single shot mode. And same thing, I can press this, make a selection here. The only difference is that when I press the shutter button, nothing else happens. I have to press it again and then press it again to get my 3 images. And that's really all there is to bracketing or setting up bracketing on the camera. And like I said, I typically shoot in increments of 1 stop. So I'll take a perfect exposure, 1 over, 2 over, from perfect exposure to -1 to -2. So I'm taking 5 images all together, and then I take them into post-production. And that's what we're going to do now. I'll be able to explain a lot better in front of the software exactly why we're doing bracketed photography, and some of the results. You'll be able to see some of the results that you can get are quite amazing. So when I was looking at the first draft of this video before uploading it to YouTube, I know something really important was missing, and I've noticed it missing from a lot of videos on YouTube that I've seen about bracketing. And it's really important for you to understand this. So let's take a look at it now and get the elephant in the room out of the way. So here's my 5 images been brought into Capture One. You can see, so I'm going to start with this one here, and we're going to take a look at the shooting information on the right hand side of the screen. Exposure compensation is 0, f-stop is 7.1, shutter speed is 400th of a second, and the ISO is 100. So now when I go to the first image underexposed, you see I've gone to -0.5 exposure compensation, f-stop is the same, but the shutter speed is now 500th of a second. If I go back to 0, it's 400, it's 500, and now it's 800 of a second. And that's really important to understand, because you can't do bracketing in aperture priority mode, because it will change the f-stop on your camera, which, as we all know, changes the depth of field, and you'll have some really wonky results. Okay, so it doesn't really change the process of how to set up the camera, but just for your understanding, you need to be aware that it's the shutter speed that's changing the exposure compensation value, and not the f-stop. And once you've got that, then you're off to the races. So if we just look quickly here, you'll see there's a plus 0.5, and then we're down to 2/50th of a second, and then max here we've got +1, 200th of a second. And if you were going, 2 stops over, 3 stops of light over, or I guess I shouldn't say stops, I should say your exposure compensation value is going to 2 stops over or 3 stops over. I think you get the idea, but just be aware it's the shutter speed that's changing and not the aperture. So my software of choice is Capture One, and you can see the 5 images that I'm going to use for this example here down the bottom, all taken at different stops using the bracketing function on my A7 IV. And the reason this is such a great example is that you can expose for the shadows here under the tree, or you can expose for the background, but you can't really do both. And this is where bracketing really shines. And so essentially what I do is I bring my images into Capture One, and then from there I export them to a folder. In this case, you can see the 5 images here, and then from there I jump into a program called Photomatics. And Photomatics, so you can see here that in Photomatics what you do is you import your 5 images, and then Photomatics will give you a range of variation. It basically combines the 5 images into one, but it gives you a whole ton of flexibility of what you can do with the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. And so if we select the natural picture here, that's like straight out of camera. But if I come up here right to the very beginning, there's a whole plethora of color variations that you can choose from. And so I'm just going to go through a few of them here, and you'll see the image change in front of you. And this is what I like about Photomatics. So my workflow is basically into Capture One, save to a folder, from the folder right into Photomatics, and then I can cycle through the different variations that there's photographic, there's natural again, which is straight out of camera, and then painterly. And I'm not saying that, I'm not promoting Photomatics. This is not a paid video or anything like that. It's just the program of choice that I use. I really like it because everything is so visual, and I can just pick and choose the images that I want. And you can see immediately, just by scrolling through, the variation in the tones that you can get. It's just phenomenal. Like this is really cool. That's painterly number 2. Now, I'll just cycle through some of the different variations. And Photomatics is not a hugely expensive program. I think it was less than $100 when I bought it. But one of the variations I use quite a bit, let's keep going down here, is creative. And the reason I like creative is because if you look at a lot of movies these days, they give you that kind of blue tone cinematic look to them. The movies are color graded, and this kind of gives you that sort of dark, just adds a little bit of drama to your pictures. But in this particular case, this wouldn't be my choice for this image because it's a bright sunny day and I'm trying to enhance what I already have taken in the photo. But just to show you, in addition to a plethora of options that you have, you also have black and white. So if you want to turn your image into black and white, you've got a number of variations here. There the midtones have been opened up big time. Black and white realistic, photographic, artistic, and then natural. So this is more like what you would shoot, if you're shooting straight out of camera. So for this image, I would probably go with, so there's detailed, that's balanced, realistic. Realistic is nice. I mean, it opens up the shadows here under the tree quite a bit. Looks like a golf green if you ask me. And it doesn't go too crazy. Photographic, again, it takes it back to something like what would come out of the camera, which, you know, I would say this realistic image here, I like the tones in this for this particular bright sunny day shot. I mean, you got enough emphasis in the clouds in the background, you know. The bridge comes up quite nice, and then under the tree, all these shadows here, you know, they've been enhanced, but they don't look too, you know, blown out. Now, a lot of times what people will do when they're first working with photomatics is they'll get carried away and they'll select, there's one here that's surreal. I mean, that looks like a cartoon if you ask me, but so I think you get the idea. So the whole idea behind bracketing for me is, first of all, I'm going from a 33 megapixel image from my A7 IV. You're taking 5 images, so roughly you got 150 megapixel image that's merged into one. So the software can really play around with the dynamic range and the color tones in your image, and you get some really artistic effects. In fact, I've used a couple of these different HDR photos. I've got them hanging on my wall in my living room. I like them that much. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to set up your A7 IV, what workflow you might want to use. Now, keep in mind that Capture One is not the only program. Like Capture One, you can do some HDR in it, but I don't think it's quite as sophisticated as Photomatics. I mean, even if I make a selection on a particular style of image that I want, or the look that I want here, I can still come over to the color palette, to the HDR settings palette on the left here, and make some more variations. I can make some fine-tune adjustments if I want, which is, you know, why I like this program. So next up, I thought it would be smart to show you guys some examples of what I've been able to do or accomplish with HDR. And you can see here in the bottom left, it's this dingy old welding shop. And the second I walked by it, I knew I had to do HDR with this fellow. He's a local welder fabricator, and I asked his permission. He let me do a shoot, and this was done. This final image was basically, I shot the him against a white background, just a 5x7 background, and then comped him into this. But you can clearly see the whole thing was done with HDR, and this is the creative look that I mentioned to you that I liked in Photomatics. I've used this a few times for sure. And here's another image. If you look, there's the straight out of camera view, and look at the drama that you can pull into the sky using HDR and bracketing your photos. It's just phenomenal, the detail that you can capture. You can also apply it to portraits or comps with individuals or models or whoever. So in this case, I've got HDR in the background. I've got some nice bokeh around the model's head, and just, you know, a fantastic look that you can achieve. There's another version of the same individual, and then something more dramatic, right? Just the sky's the limit with this program as to what you can do when you bracket your photos and take them into an HDR program. And last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't show you a beach shot, and this is probably the only one I've ever done where I've applied the surreal effect in Photomatics to an image, but in this case, it turned out quite nice. Okay guys, so that's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope I've given you some useful information to be able to do bracketing with your new A7 IV or A7 III, whatever the case might be, and some options for what software you might want to use for post-processing. And if you found the video useful, please hit the subscribe and like buttons for me. That helps me out a lot. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next video. Take care now.